Great. Well, we'll go ahead and get.
Yeah, I think building on that, like from the buyer's perspective, when we look at these different projects, and we like to have a portfolio approach, at least at Microsoft, and we want that portfolio to have global diversity. And we assess projects based on many different types of risk, some technical risk, and then some project execution and operational risk. And we do see that in certain developing countries, that latter category of risk may be higher if there's unclear policies or the supply chains are not as developed. That is inherent risk in terms of ultimate delivery of the carbon removal. But on the flip side, in many cases, those projects have really high technical potential. And also, going back to the co-benefits piece, in many cases, to Myles's point, like can offer a lot of new revenue streams for places that may be limited with other opportunities. So it's kind of weighing of those risks and saying, if we don't want to be overexposed in one regard from a portfolio perspective, but we think it is really important to have some projects in different countries of varying geographies and take on some of that potential project execution risk or delivery risk to support the growth of those industries in those regions. That's something we do see as important.
Thanks. Yeah, it looks like there's funding, but there's also lots of risk that needs to be managed, but also a lot of missed opportunities for some of our stakeholders. We started talking a little bit about this, or Myles did, but let's talk about money, because that's always important. And it's, financing is typically one of the biggest hurdles for scaling any new type of technology or project type. Are there financing approaches now that would be, effective to support these types of projects? And also would love to hear from the panel what they think, some of the financing gaps are, like what is needed to really attract investment, even short-term, but also looking more long-term to keep these things going. Do you want to start?
Yes, sure. Okay. Yeah. We need more attractive and stable prices for the carbon credits in order to reduce the return of the investment. That is what my investors, the group of investors that I represent, wants. They want attractive prices so they can recover their investment and got financial benefits. If don't, it is hard or difficult to have the money. So attractive and stable prices, I will say so.
Yeah, prices clearly make a big difference. The biochar industry exists in a bit of a funny space right now because it's among durable CDR credits, it's the lowest cost solution right now for like a durable technological removal. And I very firmly believe that there needs to be a durable technological removal that's affordable and probably even cheaper than biochar is today, or I'm pretty skeptical that the whole market will survive. If it's not affordable, nobody's going to buy it. At the same time, I think it's interesting that biochar kind of gets overlooked by a lot of different larger buyers, not Microsoft, because Microsoft is buying a decent amount of biochar, but one of the things I've been interested in is getting some of these big buyers to provide funding to do some of that technological development around biochar and also market development, because that's how we get to a point where biochar CDR credits remain affordable. And that's a lot of how, a lot of DAC credits are coming out in $500-600 a ton, right? But they're not really $500 or $600 a ton necessarily to do the thing. It's to research the thing and develop the thing and install the thing, right? It's a combination of the money's not just going to flip a switch and put the carbon in the ground. It's actually to develop out the technology. And I think in terms of keeping biochar affordable and actually maintaining at least one durable CDR technology that is affordable, I would like to see some sort of funding go, whether it's to individual companies or to organizations or groups, to really try and drive down the cost of the CDR piece of biochar. I think it's really critical to get to have at least one CDR technology that is somewhat affordable.
Yeah, I think, there's a couple of things that we see that can help kind of with these projects getting financed. One is long-term offtake commitments that kind of show this, basically that the demand is going to persist for a period of time and at a set price. So to Hector's point about price stability. The other kind of innovative solution that there's a couple of great models in the CDR world are advanced market commitments. So we have Frontier, who's doing that in the high durability CDR space, and the Symbiosis Coalition, who's doing it more in the nature-based space, and Microsoft is a member of the Symbiosis Coalition. And I think these are really great ways to build out markets and to help suppliers know, there is a coalition of buyers that will, when you bring us the things that we want to our spec, we will, we're interested in it. I think that's a really strong market signaling, and I'd like to see, more of that in more spaces in this world.
Thanks. So we talked about barriers, and I think we've touched a little bit on risk. But we know with innovation comes uncertainty, whether it's, technology related, policy related, market volatility. What are the biggest risks associated with these project types? What jumps out? And from the different perspectives that you guys provide, project developer and a buyer, standard developer, technology developer. How can we manage and mitigate these risks that exist to build more confidence in new project types? Sure, Myles, you want to?
Yeah, sure. So again, in the biochar space, there is some technological risk. Very large-scale production systems are, the TRL level of biochar production is pretty high, but it's not at a 9. So especially for some large-scale systems, and especially those that are doing something innovative with the heat or electricity, there can be some technological risk. That's mostly, that's getting worked out with each new facility. So that's a piece. Then there's clearly market risk around the physical biochar, because right now there's not a whole lot of large buyers out there that are going to give you an offtake agreement for as long as you're going to get a CDR offtake agreement for. So there is significant risk there that your CDR credits may or may not be delivered if a biochar company is unable to sell the physical product. That is clearly a risk, and again, that's kind of what our organization is focused on mitigating that risk. But I think one of the big underlying risks that's certainly far above my pay grade is whether or not the voluntary carbon markets are able to persist. And again, going back to the fact that we're needing some credits, some high durability credits that are really affordable. And that's why, in a funny sense right now, demand for biochar CDR credits seems to be going up because the direct air capture industry has done a really good job of convincing people, I think, that we need, CO2 emissions need to be offset with durable CDR credits, but they haven't done a great job to date of delivering anything that's particularly affordable for most buyers. So there is more demand for the biochar space right now, but I think long-term, the price needs to at least remain stable or go down to make it an attractive option for a lot of different companies outside the tech sector, right? Tech sector companies have relatively high profit margin per unit CO2 emission, but that's not true in most industries. So I think that's probably the biggest underlying risk in all of it.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, well, after 18 years of operating this project in Juárez, we have learned and we have the know-how how to collect and destroy the methane properly. So there are only 2 things that we need to develop more projects. We want to do it, but we need government certainty. That's one of the most critical issues we have. The past 2 federal administrations don't believe in global climate change. And actually they are enforced to putting us out of the scenario of making something for the climate change. So they want to produce energy only they only them, I mean, and they want to continue using fossil combustible. That's one of the big issues. And once again, the prices of the carbon credits. After Kyoto's protocol, we saw that the prices go down almost to zero. So there was a period that the investor didn't want to make more investment in these projects. Fortunately, in the current times, the prices are going higher, so they are now motivated to do it. But I think it was a really waste of time because the going down of the prices, we lost, and it's kind of difficult to go with that barriers.
Yeah, I think from the buyer's perspective, the risks that we have to deal with are, at Microsoft, we have a goal to be carbon negative by 2030. So that's a very near-term climate target, and we are, procuring a portfolio that we need to deliver in that time frame. And, so the things that we have to think about are, can we meet our targets in a very, short time frame? So we do take a portfolio approach with respect to durability and geography, and we invest in high durability solutions that may take slightly longer to come online or to come online in significant volumes. We also invest in nature-based solutions, and really the risk that we have to mitigate is making sure we can meet those volumetric targets, making sure that we have a good portfolio balance, and making sure that we are kind of helping build the market that we want to buy from. So it's definitely a different perspective of risk from the others on the stage, but it is something that we think about a lot, and making sure that also we're kind of aligned with the latest kind of policy guidance as well across all of the geographies that we work with. So it's being in the private sector, we still have to kind of like think about how this plays in the public sector as well. So it's a lot of different risks to balance, but I think by taking a mixed portfolio approach, that's our best mitigation measure at this time.
Great. So, excuse me. So one of the risks that I'd like to talk about, and probably selfishly, since I'm from a crediting program, but the market is really focused on high quality, and this is something I think about. But what are the unique challenges to in creating like high quality methodologies for these like emerging project types, and how do we kind of balance like innovation with like accuracy, credibility, and environmental integrity, and just making sure that we're getting the carbon quantification right?
Mike?
Myles, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll just say I think for a lot of technologies, I think science is probably the basis for it all. In my opinion, around like what these methodologies really need is really high quality science to show that what you're doing is going to persist and be durable and has a measurable impact. And I'll just tell a quick story about the biochar industry's path to where we are today. I heard about biochar in 2007 because of the terra preta soils in the Amazon, right, which is where they've been discovered, were originally discovered in sort of the 60s, 70s, 80s. It's now been recognized that indigenous cultures all around the world used biochar to improve soil fertility. And then I entered grad school in 2010 in biochar, and that was now 15 years ago. And over that time, the science really evolved. Some people said, oh, biochar lasts forever. See, it's in the soil in the Amazon. And then other people said, well, you don't know how much was there to begin with. So how can you say how long it lasts, right? So it took 15 years, or at least 10 years of that time, to really develop out a solid enough scientific basis to be able to develop a methodology around it. And I think it's particularly true for systems that interact with things like soil biogeochemistry, enhanced rock weathering, biomass burial. I think those fields probably need a whole lot more science. And in some ways, the biochar industry was lucky in a certain sense in that there were not CDR credits available at the time that all of that science was being developed, because there wasn't a whole lot of impetus for a whole lot of researchers to promote one over the other, right? Promote high durability when it wasn't. It was just a bunch of academic researchers that got in very technical arguments at conferences and in papers and eventually came to some sort of messy consensus. When you pour a lot of money into the pile, I think it makes it a little bit more challenging to get there. But
yeah, maybe I can piggyback off of that, because I think there's such a paradox in the methodology world where you want it to be very scientifically robust, and you also don't want to keep moving the goalposts for project developers where the rules are changing all the time. So it's, I don't have a solution, but I'd say that the desire is that you have things that can be, in line with the latest scientific understanding for that given pathway, and also as those things adapt, to do it quickly, but in a way where you can try to still not make project developers have to pivot every year to try to update. And I think that's the luxury I have on the buyer side of the table, is that I don't have to deal with those headaches, but I do recognize that, and it's a real problem as we're talking to project developers. They're like, I can't change to the latest version of the methodology that quickly because it means this and that. And so I think, to the extent that we can align on scientific best practices, get those into the methodologies as quickly as possible. I think that's the other thing is, I think a lot of times some of these revisions can sit in working groups for many years, and we kind of know that we're working on potentially outdated science. So if we can iterate quickly but try not to move the goalposts too much, that's the kind of the sweet spot that I think should exist in this world.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that to develop methodologies is really complicated, and
Yeah.
something about it. So I will say that only the rules, to maintain the rules for the long term and not change so quickly. On the other hand, we are committed with the high quality of our carbon credits, so we study the different methodologies and adapt the one that we consider is the best for the project. So we have not issues with the methodologies. Actually, we are working with the reserve. We have been working for 3 years and a half now, and we are pretty glad to work with them because they are quickly respond. They are so clear in what the requirements are. So we have no issues with that.
I didn't pay him to say that. Yeah, methodologies are hard to develop, and then also kind of, I think from a reserve standard crediting program perspective, kind of balancing that, providing certainty to the market, particularly the project developers that are investing the money, but also trying to improve the accuracy of the quantification. It's difficult. So we've talked a lot about barriers, risks. Maybe it's been a little down. No, I think there's. I think we've talked also about opportunities, but I did say that we're going to maybe dream a little bit here in this panel. So before we get to questions, I'd love the panel to give their perspective on what opportunities are out there if we do engage in these new emerging innovative project types, whether it be accelerating our climate goals, just unlocking new opportunities for, less developed economies, just providing more environmental benefits, maybe even beyond, carbon reductions and removals. And, what do we have to gain from doing all of this? Wants to go first?
Yeah, sure, I can start. So I'll go back, I think, to what I said at the beginning, which is I think there is a really big opportunity space when you look at these as holistic projects. And we're seeing that there are, again, emerging monetization pathways for some of these. So, whether that's selling water benefits or biodiversity credits or other ecosystem services, again, that's even more nascent than carbon credits, but it's on the horizon, I think. And so I think that's one way that can potentially support these projects and provide additional sources of revenue. The other innovation, I think, and it's obviously very dependent on whether you're talking about a nature-based pathway or a more technological pathway, but where you can either integrate into existing supply chains and existing infrastructure. So I think, for example, about a CDR supplier who bolts onto wastewater treatment plants. That's a great way where you don't have to put new steel in the ground per se, but you're just adding onto existing infrastructure. Those sorts of things I think are really cool to see. They can lower your upfront CapEx, and that just seems to work nicely in my head. I had one more thought, and I forgot what it was, so I'll hand it over to Myles. Maybe it'll come back.
Yeah, great. For biochar, I think there is a pretty significant potential. So in the U.S., for instance, in the long term, U.S. DOE does a report every couple of years. They call it the billion-ton report, which is a report that essentially identifies that there's something like 1 billion tons of wasted biomass in the United States annually. So it's an enormous amount. And not all of that is economically usable in a biochar facility, but a significant amount is. So that's kind of like the potential. And it's not as if every bit of that's going to go to biochar. It's certainly not. A lot of that should be probably used for other things and will likely be used for other things. But biochar is pretty flexible. It can use a lot of different feedstocks. In the short term, I actually think there's a pretty significant potential around biochar related to politics, which is that more and more of the costs of carbon policies are going to hit rural communities, which are more dependent on high carbon lifestyles. I grew up in a very rural area, drove everywhere I went as a kid. That was the only option to get anywhere. And so as you think about these climate policies, of course they're going to hit rural areas more because those communities are much more reliant on fossil fuels. And they're also the communities where if a biochar industry really is established, those are precisely the areas where the dollars are going to flow. Biochar is produced from agricultural byproducts and timber residues, right? Those are all entirely farming communities and timber communities. So I think there's a really significant potential here to start steering some of the climate dollars that we all want to make a difference for climate change into rural areas and provide jobs that essentially provide jobs in rural areas and that sort of mitigate some of that climate policy impact. So I think there is some potential there.
Yeah, even all the barriers we already comment during the panel, we are sure that we are in a great moment of opportunities. We are developing a new division of the company, which is focused in developing new projects, new gas collection and destruction projects. So we are looking for qualified personnel to study and modeling any case as unique, because we have found that most of the sites need a special technology. I mean, we cannot to take the available technology for all the cases. We need to adapt such technology for any particular case. So what we need right now? Qualified personnel to have the knowledge of the manage of these projects.
Great. Lot to chew on here. I want to open it up to questions and see if anyone has any burning questions they'd love to ask. And I think do we have microphones?
No.
No, we don't have microphones. Okay. So I may repeat your question just so it's on the recording. Hi.
Yes, for Kristen. Microsoft has been a huge catalyst agent in driving forward the CDR industry. I'm curious if the company has been thinking about engaging other greenhouse gases outside of CO2, such as the projects that Héctor is developing in Mexico. And maybe if not, if you could share some of your thinking behind why exclusive CO2 and exclusive removal.
I'm just
Yeah,
gonna
yeah, I'm
repeat the
Jessica.
question. No, it's okay.
Oh, yeah, you're going to repeat the question.
Yeah, just to repeat the question. So basically, is Microsoft kind of looking outside of CDRs and into other project types?
Right, yeah, so our program was established as a carbon removal program, and I'll give the caveat that I've only been at Microsoft for 6 months, so that all was before my time. I think one of the drivers behind that is just around quantification and counterfactuals, if we want to get wonky about it. That's not to say that's going to be the perspective forever. I can't speak to that. But that was the reasoning. We wanted to start in a place where, the IPCC report says carbon removal is necessary for, any reasonable climate pathway. And there wasn't much focus on it or investment in it in a catalytic way, as you said. There are, a lot of companies and buyers who are focusing on some of those other credits, which definitely I don't think that they are not valuable and important climate mitigation tools. I think Microsoft's approach was, this is an area that needs some more catalytic attention, at least in the current state of things.
Yes.
I'm Alex Schenken. I'm a professor at Northern Arizona University, and I run a spin-off called Selvaflux, and we're commercializing a discovery that tree bark takes up methane a lot in the tropics. And from my perspective, I'm curious about your perspective about an innovation ecosystem in the carbon world. We know Silicon Valley and other tech spaces, they're very dynamic in bringing new ideas to market and finding funding to support that. And I appreciate that there's a balance between, as you were saying, Jessica, the keeping things constant for developers, but still being as innovative as we can. But I'd be curious about all your thoughts about bringing these kind of high-risk, high-reward ideas that maybe not like, direct air capture are costing $1 gazillion, but other ideas that might push the kind of the ball forward, but are for small fry are hard to get to in front of buyers. So.
Yeah, maybe I can start and would love to hear other people's perspectives. So I think that there's absolutely a good burgeoning ecosystem for these early innovators. I know, at least at Microsoft, we have the Climate Innovation Fund, which is focused on investing in early stage climate companies. There's a lot of incubators. My head is blanking now on them, but there are many, and I'd be happy to provide them afterward, but that look at, things that are coming straight out of academia that are, have this sort of potential. So I think it's absolutely out there. It's about doing a good job of advertising it. I know, we can lament that there used to be DOE grants and all of those sorts of things. No comment, but I still think that there's plenty of private sector support for early stage innovation, and would be happy to discuss that after. But Myles also may have.
I don't have a whole lot to say on that, though I do know there's a lot of different buyers clubs, I think, is probably the most relevant one for a lot of the early stage stuff. In the biochar space, there are funding sources to some extent, but a lot of the kind of higher tech biochar companies are, I think, having a hard time sometimes getting financing to really develop out those higher technology systems, and it's pretty tough. And I mentioned this earlier, biochar is kind of stuck in a funny space where people will say, oh, it's TRL 8 or 9, right? So therefore, we don't, it shouldn't, there's no money there to develop the technology because the technology is developed, right? And my typical pushback is, well, the basic tech is there, but the higher tech systems are not there.
Any other questions? Yes. Or-
Hi, Anastasia from Carbon Containment Lab, and I was happy to hear your reference to the wastewater treatment facilities because we worked on that.
Cool.
One of our incubated startups out of our lab. But my question is actually connecting to a panel yesterday talking about Scope 3 and projects that are using kind of insetting approaches in order to stimulate markets and what those sorts of projects and initiatives can learn from the voluntary carbon market. And I'm wondering, I'm just trying to connect the dots a little bit with some of the need to support biochar to be bought by large agricultural companies and so on. Is there any work that you're hearing about ways of getting some of these projects financed through Scope 3 mechanisms in any of the supply chains you're involved in? Is that something you're actively looking at or would like to learn more about?
So we actively promote biochar as a Scope 3 emissions solution to certain large companies. So right now in the biochar space, the vast majority of biochar CDR credits are decoupled from the physical biochar. But that doesn't mean there's not still a carbon benefit there, because once you decouple the negative, the removal attribute, you're left with a 0 carbon biochar, which 0 is still a pretty great number for supply chain emissions. So that's one of the things that we're working on in things like potting media, horticultural growing media, and agricultural work. And also like the ability to use less nitrogen fertilizer is a big one too, right? So if you can add biochar to sandy soil, improve nitrogen retention in soil, and then reduce your nitrogen use, there is a play there, even if an agricultural company doesn't want to buy the CDR credit, because most agricultural companies have much cheaper, their marginal cost of abatement is much less than $130 a ton. It's probably 15. But they can still go buy a 0 carbon biochar where the CDR credit has been sold separately.
Hi, I'm Bob Lawrence with Land and Carbon, and we're very innovative project developers. So this has been just fantastic, and you've hit pretty much every issue that we faced. And we do soil carbon sequestration on highly degraded land, combining different methodologies, trying to optimize the credits and the land restoration, and every one of the issues that you've discussed is applicable. The one that I'm particularly interested in is with respect to methodologies and facilitating the ability of project developers who are engaged in innovative, highly science-driven practices to be able to go through a methodology, meet the requirements of that, not have to necessarily integrate multiple methodologies, but to be able to do that under a single methodology with a quantification approach that is reasonably practical. I think that's possible. Some people think that's not as much, but I think there's a way to do it. And so I'm interested in the experience, whether it's from CAR or from other carbon crediting programs in that area. It's a barrier, but to me it's a barrier that can be overcome readily. So anyway, anybody's experience with that, I'd be very interested.
I'm happy to provide thoughts, but I want to see if the okay, yeah. I mean, I think, we would love to, have a sector and cover as much as we can. The reserve protocols are very standardized and specific to a particular project type, and also given the way that we develop our performance standards, it's very specific. The additionality tests are very specific to one project activity. So, I think one of the things that we're exploring is how do we allow for protocols, or we call them protocols, but methodologies can be stacked, and how we can help facilitate that to make it easier, whether it be, just overall monitoring, reporting, and verification, kind of where are efficiencies there, and just kind of looking at the different greenhouse gas boundaries and how we can make sure that we're properly accounting for everything, but make it easier for people to stack these practices. Because our methodologies are pretty straightforward because they are standardized, and something that we are thinking about. I think, one question that we often get as well is, I want to stack, your protocol with another program's like methodology. And that I don't think we're quite ready for, but something that we are thinking about, because I think we are aware in the market that people are trying to maximize the carbon benefits, and you know, one protocol might not cover everything. So it is 12 o'clock, so please join me in thanking the panel, greatly appreciated.